Um, cool. What's your last name?
My last name is Lauer, L-A-U-E-R.
Yeah. Your first name?
Thomas, I go by Tom.
And your middle initial?
J for Justin.
Where were you born?
I was born in Mitchell, South Dakota.
Oh, that's cool. Where did you live when you became a part of the military?
I was living in Nebraska, Fremont, Nebraska.
Yeah. Did you graduate from high school?
Yes, but I graduated from high school in Washington, D.C.
Oh, well, that's fun. What high school was that?
Archbishop Carroll,
And what year was that?
1973.
When you were in high school, did you ever think that you would be a part of the military?
It was, Vietnam was going on, and it was a very unpopular war. And I didn't see that as being something I wanted to do, but the military is such a big part of my family that it seemed unavoidable. Both my grandfathers served in World War I. My dad was not able to serve. He volunteered right after Pearl Harbor and was drafted, but both times they wouldn't take him because he had really bad feet, and so he had to serve in another capacity. But I had numerous uncles. They all served at different times. One World War II, one in Korea, the other ones not in conflict areas, but they served. And I had a cousin that was wounded in Vietnam. I have a cousin that was killed in Baghdad. So I think that that was important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What branch of the service did you join?
The Navy.
Oh, that's cool. So you were a sailor?
Yes, ma'am.
Cool. And did you also say that you were part of the National Guard?
Yes, yes. I served 2.5 years in the regular Navy, 2.5 years in the Naval Reserve, and then approximately 8 years in the National Guard. And so I've had quite a bit of time in service that it was very, very important to me.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you volunteered for the service as opposed to being drafted?
Yes, it's very interesting. My age group, my age cohort, the men born in 1955 were the last group that had to register for the draft. And so I actually got a draft card, but I was not drafted.
Oh, okay.
So, but I did, the short answer is yes, I volunteered.
Okay. How did the draft work back then?
You had to register at the post office, at your local post office, and you had like 30 days or 90 days from your 18th birthday to register, and then that went into a database in Washington, D.C., and you got your draft card back. I was not drafted. The men that were drafted before me, in the years before me, there'd be a certain number drawn out, and then if your number, your birth date in that year matched that number, then you would be called up for service.
Okay. That's interesting. Where was basic?
Great Lakes, Illinois, just north of Chicago.
Mm-hmm. So it is said that in basic training the individual is broken and the serviceman is created. Would you agree with this?
Absolutely. You come in and you're a civilian, and in my case, had long hair and think that I know everything in the world, and quickly you learn that you don't. And you have physical training where you push-ups, sit-ups, run. All of you have to make it in certain parameters, or you don't make it through. water safety. In the Navy, you kind of have to know how to swim, or at least how to survive in the water. And some men came in and they didn't know how to swim. And literally, they were thrown in. They're thrown in. And you swim or you sink. And most everybody learned how to swim. And those that sank were pulled out and got to try again. I don't think anybody in my group, none in my company were ever not allowed to finish because they couldn't swim. Everybody managed to do it some way or another.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, of course, I'm not in the Army and I don't know a lot about this. But like, I think I said I would agree with it too, because there's a certain discipline that everyone has. And you can just kind of tell that they're in the Army or into some capacity.
Sure.
Yeah. Is there anything that you remember about basic training?
Yeah, there's a lot of the training was very structured and challenging. I think the one that was most challenging to me was damage control. And ships have compartments, and the compartments are sealed up so that if there's a hole blown in the side of the ship, they can seal that off, and the ship will be able to continue to float. But there's some places in there where you want to be able to shore up that hole so the water does not flood in. So we had training where we would go into what looked like several ships' compartments, and they would not blow a hole, but there would be something that looked like a hole where the water would come in, and you had to figure out how to stop that water flow coming in, using a mattress, using wood, using anything that was available to try and force that water to stay out. And sometimes you're more successful than other times. And so that was really important. And the gas training, the gas mask. We would go into a room, and you'd have a gas mask, and you would not have it on, but they would release the gas, and then they would wait just a little bit. It was a tear gas is what it was, and then you had to get your mask on while you were in the gas, and that was challenging too, because you're kind of almost in a panic mode, because it hurts and you're having a hard time breathing. So that was a big important thing. Close order drill, where you would march in formation, and you learn to instantaneously, on the order, change your direction. Left face, right face. All of those things are a part of breaking the mold of the individual that you are as a civilian, to becoming a part of the Navy, moving from a civilian to a sailor. It's just very direct and very important part of learning.
Yeah. Do you remember anyone from basic?
Sure. One of my best friends was Tim Jackson. It's funny, I hated the name Tommy, and he loved the name Timmy. And I couldn't figure. I mean, it's just one of those funny things. And so he was from North Carolina, and he liked to race cars. And he came in later. He was not somebody that started with me. He started with another company, but a medical reason or something, he had to wait for a little bit. So we came into our company maybe a week or 2 weeks into our training, and we just became fast friends. And I had responsibilities. I was the educational petty officer for my company. And this is my company too. This is the company that's at Great Lakes Basic Training, and as the educational petty officer, my job was to make sure, or try, to have all the men that were in the company be prepared to take those tests to the best that they can. You know, it's their responsibility to study and to learn the information, but I had to present it to them, if they were having trouble, I had to try and present it in a different way, or help them with their memorization. So that was a responsibility that was given to me early, and so it's a part of the process of becoming a sailor, is having responsibilities.
Yeah. How long does basic training last?
Mine was about 9 weeks. I got there in late December of 1974, and it went until the very end of November. I mean, very end of February, I'm sorry. From December to the very end of February. And it was cold. It's dead of winter in Chicago, so we dealt with a lot of snow that year.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah, you said it was about 9 weeks. Were other people's different lengths?
I think that they adjust the length of basic training based on what the requirements Navy-wide are. So when I was going through, it was 9 weeks. Somebody who went through in 2 years after me might have been 10 weeks, or it might have been 8 weeks. But I think 9 weeks is probably pretty close to the average.
Okay. What year did you finish basic training?
1975.
Wow. So basic training was over. Did you go home, or did you immediately move on to service?
I had a short period of leave to go home, and that was good to go home and see the family. And then I immediately went to A school, which was a training to be an operations specialist, which was my rating. And they're essentially a radarman. You would operate we called them radar scopes, and where you learn to identify contacts on the scope, and then you would plot them on different bits of information. This was pre-computers.
Yeah.
So then you had to make that information available to other people that would make decisions based on that. And now I had both surface radar responsibilities and air radar responsibilities. So there was generally 2 different places in the Combat Information Center, which we called it CIC. And so there would be a group with the surface contacts, and those were the ones that would be searching for contacts on the water. And then we'd have air contacts, which were those, airplanes, helicopters, missiles, anything along those lines. So there's 2 different things there. And then one of the most interesting things in my A school was learning how to write backwards, because we were behind a plastic glass. It's almost plexiglass, and there would be a pattern on the front that you could list the contacts by, surface, by air, and then they would also be where they were in relation to the ship that you were on. And so you always had to write yours backwards so that the people on the other side, the decision makers, the senior enlisted and the officers, could make their decisions in a war environment based on the information that you showed them in the back. And you had to write backwards so that they could read it on the front side. I never thought about writing backwards until I got in the Navy. So
can you still write backwards?
I haven't tried to in a long time. I think it would come back to me.
Yeah. Did you like that job?
I liked being an operations specialist. One of the reasons I liked that was when you're on board the ship, other people, the boiler technicians, the people that were operating the engines of the machine, the bosun's mate, the ones that were taking care of the outside of the ship, the supply people, they were always in the dark about what we were doing and where we were and what was going on. And in the Combat Information Center, that was important. You had to know that to do your job. So if people wanted to know what the ship was doing, or where we were going, they would always come to the operations specialists and ask them. So it was kind of neat to be be an integral part of the knowledge that got out to the ship.
Yeah. Do you think that was the right position, like where they put you was right for you?
Perfect.
Oh, that's good.
Perfect. They could, of all the rates that I'm aware of, there wasn't another one that would have been better.
Oh, that's good.
For me. I mean, for other people, I mean, I'm not saying it was the best, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
but for my personality and my talent, it was perfect.
Mm-hmm. And that was your job when you began the military service?
Right. Left A school. My A school was supposed to be 16 weeks, but I think I got out a little bit early, and I did well enough that I was able to choose. I was not at the top of my class, but I did well enough that they allowed me to choose my duty station. So
Okay.
I chose to be on a missile cruiser.
Yeah. Where was that missile cruiser?
When I got to the ship I had already been in the Mediterranean for a couple of months. It actually, earlier in the cruise, they had actually gone to Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, Russia, which is one of the first times that a U.S. warship had been to a Russian port. But I wasn't on the ship then. But it was in the Mediterranean, so that's where I got on board ship in Augusta Bay, which was one of the bays in Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I got it.
So you said that the Vietnam War was happening while you were...
That's such a difficult thing, because the peace treaty was actually signed in January of 1973 that was supposed to end the war, but it really didn't end the war. And it more or less ended our ground involvement, but we always had to, we were supposed to assist the South Vietnamese as they needed. And we were not supposed to be at war, but we were to back up the South Vietnamese. And it so happened that while I was in A school, one of the Cambodians, which is a country very near Vietnam, was taken over by the communists, and they captured a merchant ship.
Mm-hmm.
And it was called the Mayaguez. And so the Navy and the Marines had to go in and try and rescue the ship and the crew. And there was casualties involved there. So that was still happening while I was still in.
Mm-hmm.
But that was more or less the very tail. That was the end of Vietnam after that. Because while I was in A school, Saigon fell. The North Vietnamese came in and took Saigon. And once Saigon fell, the war was pretty much over, except for that Mayaguez incident that happened just maybe a month or two later. So the conflict had ended, but not really. So that's why it's so hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very unpopular war. I'm sure that you know that.
Yeah. So how did this whole gray area between, like, is the war ended, like, is it over, is it not? How did that affect you when you had gotten out of advanced training?
Because I went to the Mediterranean and not to the Pacific, it had less direct impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I wasn't someone who was able to make those kind of decisions, but I'm sure that the Pacific Fleet was still very involved in protecting the seaways and being on guard for things that are going on there. So it was a gray area, but at a certain point it just eventually stopped. And so when I was in the Mediterranean, it did not have any real impact on me.
Okay.
But it did impact the Navy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you also explained to me what your job as a special operations person was. What was the whole fleet's mission? Like, why would there be a fleet in the Mediterranean?
Well, that was during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was our primary threat, and we always played cat and mouse with the Soviets.
Mm-hmm.
They would put They would have merchant ships out, and they would have electronic gear on the merchant ships, and they would have their ships. They tended not to be in the Mediterranean. That was more of a U.S. and NATO area.
Mm-hmm.
But we did play cat and mouse with the Soviets.
Yeah.
They sometimes would have submarines. I never did have any contact with the Soviet subs, but I know that other ships did.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any specific events from when you were in service in the Navy?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was able to visit a whole bunch of ports. Some of the ports I visited was Rota, Spain, Barcelona, Spain, Corsica, which at the time I thought it was Italy, but it's French. Naples. Trying to think of some other ones. I think that those are the biggest ones. And we had one time shortly after I got on board the ship, another operations specialist came in at the same time I did. He was in a different class, but he came like a week after or a week before me in our operations specialist class. So we both went on the ship at the same time, and one of the first things they had us do was we were in a war games environment where the Leahy, my ship, was playing the part of a Russian ship. And so one night we went into complete radio and radio silence where we had no electronic emissions. So that meant that we were dark, and it was very difficult for the blue side. We were orange and they were blue, and it's very difficult for the blue to detect us, but we wanted to be able to detect them if we could, and it was very hard to do that if you're not emitting radar. So we had to climb all the way up the max and the stacks. I'll find a picture of the ship here. We had to climb all the way. We shut down all the emissions, so there was no radar going on, no radio transmissions, and we got way up in here. I was on one side and Bill was on the other side, and it was so dark we could almost see nothing, and trying to climb up the max. The max was a combination of the mast and the stack. And it was very interesting because I'd just gotten on board the ship within a week or two, and I climbed up on one side and Bill was on the other side, and we couldn't see each other. We couldn't see hardly, but what we could see was the night sky, and I remember there weren't very many stars visible, if any at all. And then the water was black because it was at night, and the only thing you could really see was just the very faintest light on the horizon where the water was separated from the sky. And I felt so small, and it was a very spiritual experience because, it's like, I am so small, and this is so vast and so big that it's like how great is God? It was for a young man. It was kind of an interesting experience because at that time I was not very spiritual, but that was a spiritual event for me.
Yeah.
That was a very, very formative thing. It just kind of formed a little bit of background on the back of my service time.
Yeah.
And then going into the different ports. Barcelona was one of the first ports we went in, and Bill and I went off together. We became friends because we came on ship at the same time, and we went into Barcelona, and we met a couple of girls, and so we were in port for somewhere more than a week and less than 2 weeks. So I want to say maybe 10 days. So we would go in and we'd meet them and talk to them, date, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so we went with them, and we went to just do different things in the town. And I had used my high school Spanish to just talk to them first, but they were much better at English than we were at Spanish. And Bill didn't know any Spanish at all, so it was I was doing the talking in Spanish when we talked to the girls, and after a while we just used English.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things about that was that Franco was still the dictator of Spain, and Franco took over in Spain after the Spanish Civil War in the mid-30s. So he was the last major leader of World War II that was still in charge of their country. But he was very near death. But he was a very severe dictator. And the people in Barcelona are Catalonians. And I don't know if you, last year about this time, the Catalonians wanted to separate from Spain and become their own country. And so that has always been an undercurrent in there. And so when we were there, these girls took us to a bar, a pub, that was a place where people that wanted to separate would gather. And of course I understood a little bit of Spanish, and of course when people are speaking very fast it's hard to understand. But this group of people also had their own language, which was Catalonian. I think that would be what you call it. Very similar to Spanish, but not the same. So I was having a very hard time following them, and so the girls would explain to us what the people were talking about, and they were talking about how bad Franco was, and how they wanted to separate, and it was very interesting to be a U.S. citizen and live your whole life under a democratic system, and then hear people and see people reacting to a very authoritarian regime. That was very interesting, and it came home to me very clearly one time when I was walking. I don't remember if it was with Bill. It might have been somebody else, but I think it was Bill. We were walking down, and the girls were not with us at this time, but we were walking, and there was a government building. I had to assume it was a government building, and the people were walking. They would walk, and then they would make a turn, and they go this, and they go all. They would not walk directly in front of the building. I mean, there was a lot of people that were doing it, and I thought, wow, this is so silly, you know. I'll just walk across. Why can't I walk across? So I started walking across, and I don't think Bill was with me. I think Bill was kind of hanging back a little bit, and I took a few steps in, and there were 2 Spanish military there by the front gate, and they had military guns, machine guns on them. And I took a couple steps in, and I hear them slap the guns. And okay, well, why would you? No big deal. So then I kept walking a little further, and then they brought the guns down. And I said, oh, I know what's going on. So I did a U-turn, went back around, and then I just did like everybody else. That was a very interesting thing. Do I think they would have shot me? I don't know. It had to be pretty obvious that I was a sailor on the ship that was in port. So I don't think they would have shot me, but I think I probably could have been arrested. So, but that's just a very small piece that you understand that the world that I grew up in is not necessarily the world that everybody else has.
Yeah, and because of that, did you feel a huge culture shock when you went to all of these different places and all the ports?
Not as much as it could. If I was actually living in there or staying in excuse me, in the area, it might have, because every night I would just go back to the ship, and so I was with other Americans and other sailors, so I could have had a much more of a shock than I did, but that was not as much of a shock as you would think, as if you were going to just say, you're going to Central America, and you were on a mission trip, and you were in there, actually working with the people. I tended to have, small little interactions with the people, but not dramatic interactions.
Yeah. Do you remember any other ports besides the one that was in Barcelona? Or
Yes.
Catalona?
Yes. Yes. The one in Corsica was very interesting, and I just looked it up, and it just the last couple of days, and it's a part of France, but I thought it was a part of Italy, and it's just a small town, and it was not dirty but unkempt when you think about the United States, how the buildings, generally speaking, are not dilapidated and they're more modern. These buildings could have been there, 300-400 years. So that was very interesting. That was in Corsica. And then I also went to Naples, and Naples is a big bustling port, a very big city, and I was just a small little piece of it, and I went through and did a few tourist things, and I remember my sister was getting married shortly, so I bought her a picture.
Mm-hmm.
Why I remember that, I don't know, but I bought her a picture. Yeah. Let's see, and then Cadiz was when we were leaving the Mediterranean to head back home. That was the last port in Europe that we hit before we headed back, and that was it's a very common place for U.S. ships to port before they head back home to the States. So there was a very, Americans were just a part of the landscape of them there. So it was not so different there.
Yeah. Do you remember the names of any other people you served with while you were in the Navy?
Yeah, Bill Hepp was a friend, and he actually left the ship before I did. I think he re-enlisted or something, and so he got another assignment. But one of my best friends on the ship was Chuck Warzine. He was a journalist, and he's the one that was able to take the pictures that you'll see later about a fire rescue that we did, and pictures of the ship that he was able to send me after I got out. He was able to send me pictures of the ship. So Chuck Warzine, Rob Offerdahl was another friend. There are other guys that I was acquaintances with, not friends with so much, but Bill Singer, and I can see the guy, but I can't think of his name. I can see his face, but I can't think of his name.
Like, what impression did all of these people's workplaces make on you?
I think the biggest thing to me was coming out of the United States. When you're growing up, you think you know how the world works. You think, how I live is how everybody lives. And it's really not the case. In Barcelona, the repression that was there. In Corsica, I don't want to say poverty, because poverty implies something really missing. But it was not wealthy. It was, they were rich in their own culture, but it was very different. So and Naples was a real education. So there was, it rounded me more to understand that while my experience is real, it's not the same experience that everybody else has in the world.
Mm-hmm. How long did you serve in the military as a sailor?
So I was 2.5 years in the regular Navy, and then 2.5 years in the Navy Reserve. And then after the Navy Reserve, then I spent approximately 8 years in the Missouri National Guard.
So what's the difference between the Navy and the Navy Reserve?
The Navy Reserve, the Navy that's your job every day. That's what you do. You go out, you're a sailor 24/7. Mm-hmm. In the Naval Reserve, most of the people have other jobs, and it's a part-time job. So you basically train one weekend a month. You know, you typically come in on a Friday night, maybe Saturday morning, and then you train that Saturday and Sunday, and then when Sunday comes, you go back to your other life. And then 2 weeks during the year, you are called to go serve 24/7 in some naval installation. It could be a shore position, could be on another ship, and so it's similar to the difference between the National Guard and the full-time Army.
Yeah.
So when I did that, I was able to go on to other ships. There was 2 other ships that I served on when I was in the Naval Reserve, and I don't remember, one of them was like a frigate or a destroyer, I don't remember which. And then another one that was more memorable to me was a landing command ship. It was LCC Blue Ridge. And on that one, I caught it in the Philippines, and then we cruised to Hong Kong. But I don't want to lose my Leahy because I have more experiences I want to talk about with the Leahy.
Do you want to talk about the map?
Sure, that sounds like a great idea. So when we came back from the Mediterranean, I had been assigned to the mess decks probably about a month, maybe between 2 weeks and a month before we started back on to the States. And that's where you just, every division on the ship has to send 1 or 2 people in to help serve the food, help the cooks with that, and so I did that. So on my way back from the Mediterranean to Norfolk, Virginia, which was our home port, I was in food service, and as a part of that, I could do my job. Then I would go up and I would sit on the bow of the ship, and it would be just tremendous feeling to be on the front of the ship and just be moving over the water and see just the vastness of the ocean. Of course, you're bobbing up and down. And I never got seasick, but there was a lot of people that did, and I'm not sure which come first. I mean, the people that didn't want to be at sea were the ones that got seasick, and the people that wanted to be at sea didn't get sick. Now, I'm not sure they didn't want to be at sea because they got seasick, or they got seasick because they didn't want to be. So it was a different thing altogether. But I really enjoyed that, and I kept a diary for that 10 days, 12 days I think. It was 12 days I think to get from the Mediterranean to Norfolk. It was very interesting. And then I got home, or got to Norfolk in, I think it was October, late October. And around about Christmas, we got orders to change ports from Norfolk, Virginia to San Diego, California. So after I got back off of my Christmas leave, we left Norfolk to go through the Panama Canal and up the coast to San Diego. And so we went through the Bermuda Triangle, which was, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Bermuda Triangle.
Did you get lost?
No, we did not. But it was very, very, very interesting to be going through that, and that we had some of the roughest seas I've ever been on when we were going through there. We, I mean, the bow of the ship, literally, the waves would come over the bow of the ship, and then so that would go down, and when that was going down, then you could see the screws in the back of the ship would actually come out of the water. That was how rough it was. And you're not just going forward and back, you're rocking back and forth this way. And when we were eating on the mess decks, you had to hold your tray of food. You had to eat with one hand and hold your tray with the other. So so I don't know how what you actually did is actually eat, and then you would go get something to drink, because you don't have enough hands to hold your tray and your drink and eat. Yeah. So it was very fun, and we stopped in on both the the east side of the Panama Canal and on the west side of the Panama Canal. And at the time I went through, the Panama Canal was a territory of the United States. It had not yet been given back to the Panamanians.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very interesting. Then we went up and went to Acapulco,
Mm-hmm.
which was it's a tourist destination. It's not so much, got a lot of drug problems now, I guess. But at the time, it was a very tourist destination. And we anchored out and went in and met some more girls there, and that was memorable. 19, 20 years old, that's memorable. And we communicated with them for a while. They were from Canada. And then continued on up to San Diego, and got into San Diego, and then we our port was changed to San Diego, and then our job, our task, was to test electronic gear.
Mm-hmm.
There was a large contract that was going to be awarded by the Navy, and the two competitors were Raytheon and Hughes Electronic Corporation. And I'm not sure exactly what we were testing, but we were primarily an anti-air warfare ship. Missile cruiser. Our missiles were primarily for air defense. So I believe that it was probably an air defense system that we were testing. So we did that for 5, 6, 7 months. And during that period of time, we were out doing testing, and one day we heard a mayday call from another ship. And that ship was on fire. It was it had been a Navy minesweeper, but they had demilitarized it. They'd taken all the military gear off, and the company that took it over was using it for oceanographic exploration. I'm not sure if they were looking for oil reserves or what they were doing, but that was their task. And this particular ship was on fire, and it got a mayday. And when you're on fire on a ship, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You're in trouble. There's no place to go. You have to get the fire out. So I was on the surface scope at the time, and from the directions of the radio transmissions, we were able to get a broad area of where it was from. And then I was able to identify the ship that was on fire from what was showing up on the scope. And so I gave the course to the ship to go to the Acquisition was the name of the minesweeper that was now an oceanographic vessel. And we went there, and that was pretty much the extent of my involvement in it. But I felt good about being the one that got us there. And when we went to got there, the ship was on fire, and we put our firefighting team on. And this was the firefighting team, and I can't identify any of these guys. I was not on the firefighting team, but this is what they did: is they went there and they tried to put the fire out, and they would get it to subside, but it would never completely go out, and it would go down, and then it would flash back. And I didn't realize it at the time, but there's somebody that was on that crew later wrote a report on it, and it's on the internet. And he said that we were there for 9 hours, and I remember we were there for quite a while, but I didn't remember that it was 9 hours. Mm-hmm. And never could get it out. So when we first got there, we went ahead and rescued the whole crew, and took them off and brought them on board our ship, and our firefighters tried to put it out, but we ran out of material. And while we were there was a Irish freighter that tried to come in and help, but it took off. They couldn't get anything. They couldn't even get the crew off, so they had to leave the ship, leave that minesweeper there. And then we came, and then there were 2 Coast Guard cutters that came, which were a little bit smaller ships, and there were also Coast Guard helicopters trying to help put out the fire. And eventually we use two different methods. The Coast Guard would use one method and we'd use another method, and so they finally just let us take care of it, and we could never get it out. So we just evacuated the crew, and then we had to leave the where did I put that? Where's that? Oh, here it is. We had to leave the acquisition there burning, and this is a picture of the acquisition as we were leaving and burning, and it was burning and sinking at the time, and it was such an unusual thing for me because at that time I was kind of mad at the Navy. I just I liked being at sea, but I didn't like the Navy. I didn't like people telling me what to do, which was, guess what? That's your life. People are always telling you what to do. I mean, if you don't know that, you will. But I was not happy with Navy. But it was really sad to me to see this ship in distress that we couldn't do anything. We couldn't help. And it had to be sunk so that it wouldn't block up the shipping lanes. And so that was me watching that ship going away. And it was a sad thing. It was a very sad thing. I mean, don't want to. I mean, nobody was killed. Nobody was hurt. But it was sad to see a ship go away.
Yeah. How long did you serve in the military?
With the Navy, it was 2.5 years, regular Navy, and then, shortly after we finished with our electronics testing, and we went to dry dock, because our ship was going to be modernized, so they had to clean it up. They took it completely out of the water, and they cleaned up the bottom of the hull because you have barnacles and all. You have to clean it and all that, and they took out a lot of the old electronic gear, put new electronic gear in. And one of the jobs that you had to do is you had to chip the paint. And so we were, my division, the operations division, which included operations specialists and the quartermasters and the radiomen, I think. And so our job was to chip the paint off of the superstructure. And this is where, if you have a good officer, it's good. If you have a bad officer, it's bad. Yeah. And the officer that we had just told us to go chip the paint, and we had pneumatic power tools. And so it would bang on the side of the ship of metal, and they didn't give us any hearing protection. And I went through that for a day, and then they told us to go back out, and I said, look, I'm not going until you give me some hearing protection. And in the Navy, you don't say, I'm not going to do something. They don't like that real well. So it was kind of back and forth for a little bit, and I don't remember if we went back out that day or not. But when it came time the next day, we had hearing protection. And I'm sure that our chief petty officer had to tell us that he wasn't going to be given ultimatums, but I'm sure he went to the officer and said, look, my men need hearing protection. That's not how you treat me. So that was a kind of an interesting event. A little bit of rebellion there.
Yeah. What was like a normal day like? Like do you have a schedule or?
Oh yes. At sea and in port are two different schedules. At sea you're 24/7, you're on the whole time. And you'd have 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And for some odd reason, I don't know why, I liked the night watch better. So I'd go from I think it was 7 to 7, but it might have been 12 to 12. But you would spend time out, you're watching your scope, making sure that there's no other ships coming in too close, or if there's ships that are coming in close, that they're ships that you want there, you want to be operating with. And sometimes you'd have exercises where there'd be war games is what it comes down to, is where, you know, there's one side is trying to penetrate the defenses of the other, so that's what you're in this gaming environment. Now, not all the time, but certain times, usually like 2 or 3 week blurbs at a time, you would be in these war games.
Mhm.
So that would be one time when you'd get up and you'd go spend your time at your watch. And in your other 12 hours was you would eat, sleep,
Mhm.
take showers, clean up all that. There wasn't a lot of time. It wasn't a lot of time.
No.
But it was I did enjoy it. And in port, my particular rate, operations specialist, there really wasn't much for us to do while we were in port. So we were just there to watch the equipment, secure it so it wouldn't be damaged by somebody or something.
Mhm.
And so that was much easier. When we were in port, it was much easier.
Yeah. Did you ever get back with the people that you served with?
I contacted Chuck Warzine, my buddy, a few times, but it was in the days before email and texting and all that, so it wasn't as easy to stay in contact. So I haven't been in contact with him for 20, 30, 40 years, 30 years, probably not 40, but 30.
Yeah. And were there any pictures that you wanted to show us?
Oh yeah, I did. Maybe now might be a good time to go ahead and stop that.
Yeah. Red button.